Hello! Hello everyone, thanks for coming along and joining the Facebook Live. As you can see, I'm all by myself today, and some of you will have known that from the PodTips group. Ant is in a place that I didn't know was a real word, to be honest, Kathmandu. He's out in Nepal, up a mountain somewhere, enjoying it, looking at stars and whatever's over there. So I'm all by myself today, but some of you have been very kind to say you'll jump in. But I thought it was a great opportunity to do a bit of a live Q&A as well. So you have been submitting your questions all week, and I want you to keep submitting them now. So, first off, do pop a comment, say hello. Hello, John. He said he's run out of milk. He'd have to have a black tea then, I guess. I don't mind a black tea. I only have a teaspoon of milk in mine. John's going to jump on a little bit later. Do say hello if you are watching. Mark, hi. Mark's going to jump on a little bit later on. Good afternoon. Reese, hi there. Issa, Dion, nice to have you along. Thanks for watching. Do drop us a little hello and do drop us any questions as we go along with this. Now normally I do have a cup of tea. I always have a cup of tea with one of these because my throat gets quite dry. So apologies if I do a little slurp in between questions and answers. Hi Jason, thanks for coming on and watching. So I think the best thing we can do is just jump in with a couple of questions and we'll work our way through. As we get to questions that apply to different people, if it's okay with those guys, then we'll add them to the camera. And have a little discussion with them. If you have a question but you'd like to ask us live, just drop a comment here too, and then I can add you into the call. You can ask the question, or you can just comment the question and I'll answer it as well. So cracking on, first question that came through from my little video yesterday was from Matthew Moore. He says, have you a pet hate when it comes to background audio that you always remove? For me, it's the crackling of my co-host's vape machine as he's vaping away. Could you just ask him not to vape, I guess? For me, that noise, it's not so much the ums and ahs, which we remove a lot for our clients. It's more when someone's had a little bit of vocal training. Now, bad vocal training teaches you, rather than say and ah, to use words like and, and you use the that gives you the time to think in an actual word, which for podcasts it sounds worse. You can remove an but if you remove an and or an or whatever, if it's an actual word, then the sentence stops making sense. So that's a bit of my pet hate. You get it with a lot of politicians because they're giving a little bit of speaking training, and that's meant to make them sound more like they know what they're talking about. It doesn't. It just makes an editor's life difficult. So that's a bit of a pet hate for me. For my personal pet hates, I mean, I say and ah a lot, especially in these as well, so I can't moan about those. My personal pet hate is more when I touch the microphone. So I might knock the microphone and not realise, or my headphones have touched it. I'll have finished doing the recording and I've sat down to edit it and I go, ah. You get that little click, click, click sound, or something you can't really remove in post. And that kind of bugs it up a little bit. So that's one of my pet hates. So thank you, Matthew Moore, for that particularly good question. Do tell me your pet hates. What are your pet hates when you're editing, when you're recording, those things that really sort of annoy you. Those that just joined, do say hello in the comments. Hi Robert, thanks for joining us again. Do say hello in the comments and do drop us any questions you have as we go along. I'm going to need your questions to keep this going. Raphael said, with the majority of my listeners or downloads coming from Apple Podcasts and Google Play, is it worth the additional cost and effort to target iHeartRadio? Excuse me, does anyone have any statistical information to share? iHeartRadio is one I'm not particularly expert at. It's not a UK platform, so we find it difficult over here to get it on there. The only thing I can say is Libsyn will help you do that, so our preferred host will help you do that. I'm pretty sure a lot of the other ones will as well. And I always say get the podcast everywhere, even from launch. You don't want to have any barriers to have to break down. So if you have a chat with a friend, you say, oh, you should really listen to my wrestling podcast. Oh, brilliant. Yeah, I've got Spotify already. Is it on Spotify? And then they turn around, oh, no, it's not. But if you download this app and then you search for it here and then you press subscribe, you've lost that person. So don't leave any barriers. If it's free to do, and it is so easy to do now, even Spotify is easy to do with the right hosts, put it out to as many places as possible. Sorry, that's not a particularly direct answer for you, Raphael, about iHeartRadio, but hopefully that helps. Hi to Robert. Morning, afternoon, everyone. It is morning for you guys over in the US. It's just gone 1 o'clock over here. So we do this every Friday, these Facebook Lives. And normally we have Ant. For those who've just joined, Ant isn't here. He's in Kathmandu in Nepal. And so it's left me on my own. So I'm doing a bit of a Q&A about podcasting, or there's some questions about just about everything. So if you can, please do drop me a comment, say hello, and a question to this video right now. So just anything that's on your mind about podcasting. It can be about anything really. Let's have a bit of fun with it as well, shall we? So third question on the list here was Richard Daniel Lunt. I believe sponsorship and affiliates are the way to go for a new podcast I'm about to set up. Can you suggest some simple rules in terms of selling sponsorship, i.e. how much you should be looking to request? Should it be based on block listening, per listener, per episode? Thanks. This is a question I actually wrote a bit of a blog about, had a bit of a social media rant about making money from a podcast, and then I wrote a blog about it this week. I thought that the word monetization wasn't really a word. I've been corrected since. That came from a marketing friend of ours, Anne Hanley. She said that it wasn't a word, so I blame her really, but I should have done my research. Apparently it is in the dictionary since the 19th century, but I still think it's a bit of a yucky word, and I think a lot of creatives do. For podcasts, I just say, well, let's try and make money from them. But there's a lot of not false idols, but a lot of false people giving false information about this. And the figure that gets bound around is that you need 10,000 listeners to get any sponsorship and make money. You don't. You really don't. So, in answer to Richard's question, it's completely up to you. You really need to focus on what you value your podcast at, what you value giving away a sponsorship slot on or an advert in your actual airtime, how much that's worth to your audience, whether the product is for your audience. So if it's a fitness podcast and it's an advert for fatty chocolate biscuits, then it's not really direct for your audience. You want more fitness shakes, protein shakes, or I don't know, salads. And it's what it's worth to you. Like, you're going to be, if this is the first time you're getting a sponsor, this is the first time you're commercializing your podcast, your bit of creative, the thing you've put time in. So put the price that you want on it. Don't devalue it because you think, oh, it hasn't got as many listens as it said. It's about engagement. It's about how those people engage with it. Tim's absolutely right. You do need 10,000 to start using agencies for advertising, but you can arrange your own at any level. And I'll put the link to the blog after this, but sponsorship isn't the only way to make money from your podcast. There are loads of other ways, and that are more successful from the early doors. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit, Richard. It's not a direct answer, but there isn't a direct answer for that. It's what you think your podcast is worth, and what you're willing to sell at. And I think that if you sort of find a middle ground to what you're willing to make the advert and let it go on for, and sort of what your ideal amount is, and then you've got a bit of room to negotiate with anyone that wants to be a sponsor. Mark has asked a question. Now, I know I was going to bring Mark on, so I'm just going to see if I can. Now, I'm doing this through the... Mark, it's not saying I can. Oh, I'll bring Mark on camera. Let me just press the invitation there. I'm just pressing the invitation for you, Mark, because you had a question. See if I can bring you on camera. So I'm using the Facebook phone app for doing this because it's really easy to add people in. However, it is only on mobile at the moment, which is a bit of a pain. It's gone off of desktop. So, hi, Mark. How you doing?
Hello. How's it going?
Can you hear me, right? Yeah. How are you, pal?
I can hear you loud and clear. I'm great. I see you literally live in a hut in the woods.
That is exactly where I live. Some people I do we do a lot of one-to-one calls, and they think that I'm living in some sort of Swedish spa because of all the wood paneling. But no, I literally live in a cabin in the woods, a bit like a horror movie. Can you introduce yourself? What podcast do you do, pal?
I host a music industry podcast called Behind the Noise, where I talk to various people who are in the music industry, all levels and occupations, be it artists or people from record labels, people who organise festivals, PR companies, all sorts, and just get to hear their story. I try to go for people who you don't normally get to hear from, sort of behind the scenes people as well as the artists themselves.
Amazing, great stuff. And you've been doing that a while.
Just hit 1 year, first year, so it's been going really well.
And you do like a YouTube video of it as well, don't you?
Yeah, we've got a 3-camera setup of it, which took us a while to get going with that one because it's a bit more complicated, but finally getting there now with them.
Just so people can go and check that out. It's really worth checking out that video because it's a really nice way of doing things on YouTube. What's the YouTube channel called? It's the same as the podcast.
Yeah, if you just on YouTube, if you just search for Behind the Noise podcast, you'll find it. Or you can go to behindthenoise.net and you can get everything there.
Amazing. You sent a comment to my video of me being all by myself yesterday. He said it's not really a question, but maybe address why many new podcasters seem to gravitate towards hosting their podcast on SoundCloud. You said you've spoken to 3 people in the last 3 weeks who have done just that.
Yeah, like brand new people to podcasting. It's almost as if they'd failed. They didn't do any research. They just sort of, someone had told them, "Oh, just put it on SoundCloud," or it was the first place they could think of without actually researching it. Which when I looked into it, I don't have any my shows on there. I know some people do, but I don't. Have you got any shows on there? Do you put to there?
So we put them there, but not as hosting. So we'll put them there to get a few organic listens. With our host, you can just click a button and it goes straight out there anyway, so we're just as well. But it does seem that that's the first place people tend to go. I know that a lot of our Australian clients go there because SoundCloud is huge in Australia as a listening platform. Yeah. So I think that's why they go there. We always give the advice that maybe isn't the best idea. And we've made it quite clear who our favourites are for hosting, but it's a music platform.
Yeah, I understand.
That's the thing. You've got to remember it's a music platform.
I would have it as a destination, but I certainly would not have it as my host. I wouldn't trust my back catalogue in the hands of SoundCloud, especially given some of the financial difficulties they've been noted to have the last few years.
That's what's worried a lot of people, and that's it. They've had tens of millions of losses of cash. They were 2 days from closing down last year. I remember writing a blog from it. I was flying back from Spain and reading all these things going, oh wow, we've got clients who have used SoundCloud with it before they came to us, and worrying for them that they would lose their subscribers. And that's the big worry. If something like that drops out, you lose the subscribers to your RSS feed, and that's what we've all worked so bloody hard for, isn't it? So
it is. It's a bit of a lack of confidence, really. If they have to keep outsourcing for further investment, it doesn't fill you full of confidence, does it?
No, exactly not. And that's the main worry. I mean, there's a couple of things as well that have put us off. A couple of other hosts, including SoundCloud, is that they haven't gone to the new IAB stats, which means that they haven't gone to the stats that mean if someone sort of rejoins 3 or 4 times, that counts as 3 or 4 listens rather than just the one. So it's not brilliantly honest. And they haven't done the new iOS 11 updates yet, which were coming up for 4, 5, 6 maybe months ago now that came out.
Yeah, I don't think they're really, for podcasters are not their primary focus. It's media people and music artists, I think, primarily.
The biggest thing for me that caused a problem with SoundCloud, I don't want to just sit here and slate them, but just to make people aware of the problems, is that actually they don't, even on their pro platform, they don't allow you to schedule. So one of our clients who wanted to do a daily podcast was like, oh yeah, I want to host it on SoundCloud, and had to have quite a long conversation saying, please don't make us sit there every morning at 5 a.m. and upload a podcast daily, because it's just not going to work. But no, that's amazing. Who are you hosting with, Mark?
Libsyn.
You are Libsyn, brilliant. Yeah, that is who.
That's the thing. I did research when I started. I looked at all the top podcasts and said, where do they all host? And most of them are on Libsyn. I mean, there's like Blueberry and Podbean as other ones now who I recommend them as well. But for me, it's always been podcasts. Libsyn. I've never had a problem with them so far. They're very reliable. The stats are good. I always recommend Libsyn to people.
Fantastic, brilliant. Have you got any more questions for me, Mark? Before we
No, that's it. No, I just wanted to call in.
Brilliant. No, thanks very much. You've helped me have a sip of my cup of tea, which is why mainly I'm bringing people on. Your podcast
in absence.
Oh yeah, man. No, well, he's bugging off on holiday, so let's see if I let him back on next week.
It's all right for some, isn't it?
That's it. That's it. It was Behind the Noise podcast, wasn't it?
Yeah, go to get behindthenoise.net and just on YouTube search for Behind the Noise podcast and you'll find them all there.
Amazing. Thanks for coming on, Mark.
No worries. See ya.
Chat to you later. Thanks, Mark, for doing that. Let's move on to another question. If you're just joining, do say hello in the comments as we go. I'm going to try and keep up with them as much as I can. Tim, not really sure about Podbean, just don't know anything about them. We hear a lot of things about Podbean, but they are still early in their sort of life cycle, so that's what worries me. But I'm sure they're doing a great job. I know that they've just got Spotify as well through there. They are shaky on financial grounds. Tim, no, I don't live in a sauna. I'm living in a wood-panelled cabin at the moment, saving a bit of money. But absolutely love it, especially when it's sunny days like this. Ben, thanks for joining. Toria, Raphael. Mark, who just came on, said you won't get any sponsorship without good content. So I'd focus on that first. That is really, really good advice. Massively important. Isa said, hi, any tips if you video record your podcast and put it on YouTube? How to get your content out there on YouTube and have people see it? We use something called TubeBuddy, which is a really great plugin for YouTube, and it allows you to see how some of the big videos are tagging them. So tags are really important. It runs you through the things to make it list well. And then again, it's all about the content. But do check out Mark's podcast that we just spoke about. He does some great things on YouTube. If you are just joining, say hello. Ben, good afternoon. Raphael, good day, podcasters. Harry, thanks for joining. Tim says, Robert, I use Overcast on my iPhone. Good tip as well. Very good tip. So, another question from Cynthia. This one did make me laugh. Marketing. Can you tell? I want to know about marketing. Lol. And Simon said, ditto that. All about spreading the word. We have been going through this sort of cycle with our clients for quite a long time, in that making the actual thing is probably only about 50% of the battle. You can see my dog's making a little entrance in there. The funny thing is, that's my Labrador, Lexi. I just popped her in a little soft bed crate and zipped it up, and she's managed to escape and start walking around, the cheeky mare. Marketing is half the battle, really. Making it is 50%, and like Mark said, the content has to be good, otherwise you're just trying to sell something or market something that people won't enjoy. But marketing is half the battle, and it's gotten more and more difficult over the last couple of weeks, months, years now, and we've seen social media stop us from posting it as well. We did a great episode this week with an episode from Alex, who was struggling with social media engagement on his podcast's posts. And we talked about Facebook pages and how they've declined, about trying to get real engagement. And marketing podcasts, Tim's just said, marketing podcast is very tough. It is tough. But there are a couple of little hacks and tips that you can get your social media posts to stay higher on the newsfeed. But the biggest thing, and I'm not going to go into huge amounts, but we do have a promotion checklist that I can put a comment in here and download it. It's a nice checklist of ways we've actually grown our podcast, and they're tried and tested. There's no bollocks, it's just the stuff that works. But the biggest thing is just engage conversations, be genuine with it, write posts that get people talking. It's social media after all, and those sorts of things that get people chatting, get people commenting, have conversations. They're the real things that cut through. And setting your expectations in the right place as well, because if you just think that, and this is going back to false prophets, what we were talking about earlier, if you think you can grab a microphone, start recording, put it on whatever, whether it's Libsyn, Podbeam or anything, or podcast websites, anything like that, and you're going to be an overnight success, and then you're going to make millions, and then you're going to post pictures of your Rolex and your Ferrari on Instagram, I'm sorry, podcasting isn't the thing that's going to do that. And there aren't many things that are going to do that for you now, unless you get lucky in the stock market or something. Marketing your podcast isn't easy, but we do have what we call the super duper podcast promo checklist, and it's a big old list. So Cynthia, I will put the link to that in here. Tim says live broadcasts like this work well. Thanks, Tim. It's funny actually. We were talking to one of our podcasters, Jim, and he was looking at the word broadcast and the word podcast, and it was almost like broadcasting is. He says it's like radio is trying to appeal to mass, so it's mass appeal. Whereas podcasts, you're catering to a niche. So we could almost call podcasting like narrowcasting, which I thought was a really interesting concept. So Cynthia, thank you very much for your question on marketing. Like I say, I'll put a post to our tested ways of doing it, but just go and have conversations with people, whether it's on social media or in real life. Sean Douglas, is there a metric used as a standard for growth? If a podcast has been going for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or a year, are there benchmarks that we should be hitting? I know that John's watching. John, you've been doing a podcast for a very long time. I'm just going to see if I can bring you on camera if you are available to. I've just got to, sorry, my hand's going to go over the camera a bit now. I've just got to scroll through and find where John is. Just going to see if I can add John in. Bear me just a second. John's been doing a podcast that's very, almost niche. Just sending that invitation now to John. He's been doing something that is essentially niche because it's for a just sort of one town. There we go. I'm just adding John in. It's for one town, and it's for football or soccer if you're in the US, I guess. But he's managed to market it very well and create something fantastic. But he's been doing it a long time as well. To answer Sean's question, he might be able to help us a little bit on the stats and benchmarks you're looking for. I don't want to say too much because I'm sure John will have some very good insights on it, but really it's again what applies to your podcast. We know things that John, just going to saying can't add you because you're already being brought in on camera. So it says you're being added, John. Hopefully we'll be able to chat to you soon. Sorry, this is a little bit rough and ready. The technology is not brilliant when you're on your own. Sean said, is there a metric used as a standard for growth? And I had wrote a blog. I was a bit shitty. I was at an event and they were talking a lot about podcast listeners. And we all talk about podcast listeners a lot. Just going to try and add John again. But I think that's the wrong metric. I mean, it's good to give you a benchmark. And you can only go by the stats you've already had. So look at the stats you've had and then try and improve on them. There's no point me saying, yeah, by 3 months you should have this many listeners, or 6 months you should have this many listeners. What I like to look at is the engagement you get. At the end of the day, if you were looking at it for a sponsor or to sell a book or to even just to get people to talk to you and have comments, you are going to be much happier. So a company that sponsors it, for example, will be much happier if they got 5 sales from 100 people than if they got 1 sale from 100,000 people. That's the metrics you should be looking at. Are you enjoying, just trying to add John again. Are you enjoying the conversations you're having? Are you getting success in what you're trying to do with the podcast? Setting yourself goals is massively important. So if you think, Sean, if you look at your podcast and go, right, by 3 months, I want to do this. And that can be, I want to have this many listeners, but I also want to be getting 10 comments on each episode that I post. And then in 6 months, I want to have a sponsor, or I want to sell 10 of my own book, or I want to sell 4 of my own consultation package, and then set yourself some goals. And those benchmarks, you might not hit them, but then after the 3 months, you go, okay, well, I can then redo my 6-month goals to make them more realistic. I think that podcast listeners is a mistake to have as your metric that you're working to. I think that you want to go for engagement or goals specific to why you're doing the job. Hi, John.
Yeah, all right.
How are you?
I think it was.
All right.
Yeah. I think it was the lovely school Wi-Fi that wasn't letting me on. So,
they've blocked the kids and you from Facebook, have they?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, probably more me than them. Which is, makes me a little bit safer. Yeah. So you were talking about numbers and what they should be.
Yeah.
The big answer is there is no rule. We started From the Trend 8 seasons ago, and my co-host said, how many do you reckon we'll get? And I said, well, if we do really well, we might get about 500 listens by the end of the first season, but we got over a couple of thousand in the first episode. That was a long time ago when there wasn't a lot of podcasts around. There weren't any of the Watford podcasts around. There are still only 2 that talk about Watford. There's another Watford themed one. The other one I do called Hornet Heaven, which is Watford as an audio sitcom that's Watford themed. So I don't think anyone should do that. The cycling podcast I'm also involved with has had millions because of the people who are involved with it. They were all established journalists. They were the first podcast ever to get accreditation for the Tour de France. So they had something behind them already. It wasn't like they were starting from scratch to try and develop an audience. But also it's helpful to have partners, let's say, in promotion. So we did a lot of stuff with Watford Football Club. So in our first year, we actually had a little column in the programme, which we wrote. We gave them content which they wanted, so fans' perspective, and it got us a mini advert, let's say, in the programme. But also, the nicheness of our topic on From the Vicar End really helped to be able to only talk to a few people who actually spoke to a lot of our audience. So the local newspaper were always interested in running stuff about us and what we were doing. And then, like you say, there are different things that we did, like the fact that we did a thing where we got Watford fans to wear vests to the last game of the season, the first year that we did it, because one of the Watford players had done. That was really helpful. Just come up with a silly idea or something that people could engage on, not just a level of listening to us. It always, not just, what I'm trying to say, not just engaging with us as a listener, but also engaging with us on a fun activity that they might not have done. Yeah, and they might have might have found out about it via the podcast. They might have found out another way, got involved, and that might have then got them involved and listening to the podcast. So there's lots of things to do, but you couldn't give a number. There isn't a number.
What's interesting about those, John, in those 3 different projects, you understood from the get-go, and I think that's important that people do, is that they would get different numbers, and that wasn't necessarily made them more or less successful. Like the cycling podcast had a lot of people attached to it, so you knew it was going to get a lot more numbers because of that. But you didn't compare the other ones that didn't to that straight away. In that, I think a lot of people see big numbers when it's a celebrity podcast or influencer, if you like, or whatever people like to call themselves, and they go, oh yeah, 10,000 downloads in their first episode, oh brilliant, that's where I should be. When actually you've got to remember that those people probably had 100,000 more people following them on Facebook and those sorts of things that they could hit, and it's about being realistic what goals that you set with the podcast and what you want it to do.
The other thing is with those numbers, I was a massive thing about From the Vicar End, compared to something. So what, having worked in radio, talk about reach of your audience, well, how many people go to Watford matches? How many Watford fans are there out there, and what sort of percentage of that do we get? And you've got to say it's somewhere near it's more than 10% of the numbers that go to home games, but there's a lot of people who listen to us around the world because there's Watford fans all around the world. So that you need some sort of thing. How big is your potential audience to know how much of it have you sort of captured? But actually knowing that's quite a hard thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a particularly hard thing to do if you're doing a very broad, as we said, a broadcast, a broad interest topic as well. And Jim that said that about he does the in general on the Left Side Football Show, and that's a really tough market to just hit because it's anyone who likes football.
But then I suppose you could sort of target and do a little bit of content in a if you were say doing rock music or heavy metal rock music, then targeting a few groups, let's say, to join in. Even though you're a fan of Metallica, you aren't necessarily. If you could do something that would target those Metallica fans, that would give them sort of an in into your podcast. Then, because nobody is only into one band, that would help them then see what else the podcast is worth to them in terms of the wider audience that, the wider knowledge that they can gain by watching it or listening to it.
Absolutely. So the 3 names of your podcast, give us them again so people can go and check them out.
So there's From the Vicar End, if you like oldish blokes talking about Watford Club on a weekly basis. There's Hornet Heaven, which is the audio sort of Watford sitcom about when Watford fans die. They all go to Hornet Heaven, where you can go to Big Atrium, pick up a programme, Watford Ancient Turnstile, and you are instantly at that game. So we're not Watford till we die, we're Watford forever. And the other one then is the cycling podcast, which is this year, I think we'll be our 6th year of doing it, and that'll be our 6th Tour de France, where we do a daily podcast. In fact, no, more than a daily podcast. 2 podcasts a day they do during the Tour de France. But we do all the grand tours, as well as a weekly podcast.
Amazing. It was 2 of those that did well at the British Podcast Awards last year as well.
Hornet Heaven got silver in the sports podcast award, and then the cycling podcast was also nominated
Fantastic.
for that award.
And those are open. If you are in Britain, those are open again now. The nominations for those. You going again?
I haven't thought about it actually. I know last week. I haven't thought about it. But yeah, should do. Yeah.
Come down for a beer.
Yeah.
John, thanks for jumping on with your bad school Wi-Fi. Right. You can go back to your marking now.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers, John. Thanks. Thanks, John, for coming on. Do check out his podcast if you're a Watford fan, or if you're not a Watford fan. And there's a cycling one as well. Just a couple of messages from people. Tim grew up in Watford. I made a joke about being poor you last time, so I won't do that again. If you do interview show the connections themselves, if you do an interview show, the connections themselves can be worth it, even with 0 downloads. Absolutely right. Yeah, you get content from those and an association from those, which is really, really good. I'm going to just rattle through a couple more questions. I'm aware that we are running more time. By the way, these Facebook Lives are every Friday, UK time, 1 p.m, which is in the morning for PST and over in America. However, we're meant to do them for half an hour, and they always rattle on for sort of 45 minutes to an hour. So sorry if we keep rattling on. I'm going to go through a few questions a little bit quicker now. So Robert, who listens every week. Thanks, Robert. You're watching now. From the consumer side, what apps or websites are the best at delivering and managing your podcast subscriptions? I've always just used Apple Podcasts, but as I've increased my listening, it starts to feel unwieldy, and I don't like the way it delivers new episodes. Any better choices? The new Apple Podcasts app has received some bad reviews, really. I mean, I still use it quite a lot. The Stitcher app is loved by Android users. Casts is really good. Pocket Casts. Have a play with them. I mean, I don't feel like you need to potentially pay too much. I mean, Overcast, a lot of people, I think that's still a paid one. Overcast is excellent, actually, so go and check that out if you've got, I think it's like £1. It depends what you want from it. I quite like the fact that with Pocket Casts, I've stopped them from downloading automatically, and I just download the ones that I want. And Tim's absolutely right. Spotify is a really good one as well. More and more podcasts are going to Spotify. Hope that helps. Robert, Mike Law, marketing again. Is it good to cycle focus between marketing options? Send everyone to Instagram for a week, then the website for another, or to always use a buckshot approach? He says, I hope you say focus. I do say focus. You can obviously tweak things as you go along, but when you're marketing your podcast, I'd have one home for it. Always send people there. And I'm part of a content marketing group, a mastermind group with Andrew and Pete, who are 2 fantastic guys here in the UK. Go and check them out. They're just called andrewandpete.com. In their Atomic group, they've just done a new social media show that they do. They're fantastic, their shows. They're fun, but they're really, really good for learning things. And their biggest piece of advice when they start that off is just to knuckle down on one platform. It's okay, yeah, we're obviously doing podcasts, but if you're going to promote them, go and pick one platform and just drill down on that for a large amount of time. Now, go and do that for 3 months. Then in 3 months, if you want to pick up some of the others or share things across, absolutely, but knuckle down on that one platform. And you can see, if you do have, say, a website that you're pushing everyone to, go and check out your Google Analytics stats or your stats and find out which social media platform is working best for you now. Pick that one, double down on it and work really hard at it. But focus on one platform and pushing people to the podcast. We always say, get a podcast website, push people to there, and that gives them the option. If they are podcast listeners and they already have apps, then they'll know to search for your name if they just want it in their app anyway. So do focus. Natalie, who runs a fantastic podcast as well about content marketing,
Small, probably crap questions, he says, but I'm sure it's not. But is it advisable to put the episode number in the title of the podcast, or better to leave that out? For example, mine would be episode 4, How to Grow Your Business Through Podcasting with Chris Huskins. Very nice. Tim, thank you. You answered this one for me. If you use something like Libsyn, you can include the main title with the numbers in. So it can be PodTips 01-live, or whatever the title is, but then further down in the iTunes optimization box you would just put the title, leave the numbers out, because you can put in, for iOS 11 users, the numbers for that and they appear in the right direction, have the numbers put in by Apple Podcasts. Absolutely the right answer, Tim, but because you answered that, I did make you ask me another question. I have a replacement question. What bit rate should MP3 files be set at? Too big and you are wasting space, and too low the audio quality suffers. Any recommendations? Yeah, we tend to do a couple of different ones, and the reason for that is that we have different. Cut the long story short, different podcasts need different things. If you're just doing voices, there's not much else, there's very little music, then you can use something as low, and it's recommended by Libsyn to be 96 kilobytes per second. A bit rate, just for those that don't know, is the speed at which data transfers. So if there's less to your podcast, less elements, less need for lots of different sounds building up, then you don't need as fast a bit rate, if that makes sense. So, I mean, just speech is fine at 96 kilobytes per second in mono. We export most of our stuff at 128 kilobytes per second in stereo, which is like the standard what CDs used to be in, but we have a lot of sound effects and music in a lot of our podcasts. If you are doing anything for Amazon Alexa, so we've got a podcasting daily skill in there. They ask that things are at 256 kilobytes per second MP3, mono or stereo, they don't mind. But because it plays out of a speaker that's not necessarily that loud, or it's going to go out to bigger speakers like it connects to Sonos and things, they want it really high quality. So those are the bit rates. I hope you sort of agree with those. I think they're fairly right. Going back to the numbering thing that Tim said, apparently Apple won't feature it if you have not have an episode number in the title. I knew that they were going to go with not having, if you don't have episodes numbers in there, they won't feature it. But yeah, that's probably true. They are moving towards that. Tim, thanks for your question on bitrate. Natalie then said, P.S. Chris Huskins, this would make a really good podcast episode title. So will you come on my podcast? Yes, we'll make that happen. Alex, who is on this week's PodTips podcast, we talked about how to get more engagement on your posts on social media for your podcast. He's asked a bit of a fun question, so we've got a quick round here. He says, Star Trek or Star Wars? Star Wars for me, but only recently. I wasn't really into space stuff for a long time. I'd seen all the Star Wars films, didn't really get the hype, rewatched them all in the last year, and fell in love with them, and loved the new one as well. Controversially loved the new one. I won't give any spoilers, but the point that he brushes his shoulder, best part of the film. Arnie or Sly? Arnie, all the way, absolutely. Even in Kindergarten Cop, one of the best films that Arnie's ever done, arguably. Oasis or Blur? I think Oasis, and I even like their solo stuff now. Favourite Looney Tune? Bugs Bunny, all day. I used to have a baseball cap when I was really young with Bugs Bunny on the front, and I lived in that. That's a bit of a fun question, so thanks for that, Alex. Andrew from Andrew and Pete, who we were talking about after. What's the best way to record Pete in an ice bath? There's a bit of backstory to this, but we're working with Andrew and Pete on their second series of their podcast, and they at some point are going to put Pete in an ice bath. Just keep your microphones away from the water, I guess. I think if you've ever seen on Radio 1, they do, Scott Mills does the feature where they spit water all over each other with puns. I can't remember what it's called now. I think they put a rubber glove over their microphone, actually. I think it's probably more for comedy than anything else. But yeah, just don't get the electrics near the water would be my top tip there. Matthew Moore, you know what? I've got a great question, but I'd rather keep it until you are both around to answer. How do I go about sending it to you ahead of the next joint show? You can send it here or message me, no problem at all. In fact, if it's a really great question, you can get it on the PodTips podcast as well.
That's the questions that we've had in on there. So thank you very much, everyone, for your questions. Tim says, ask Andrew about his hot tub. If we're talking about in-jokes. That's a really good point. In-jokes don't work on podcasts particularly well. It was something that we were taught in radio massively, is to avoid in-jokes, avoid using other DJs' nicknames that you might know. It's a way of isolating your audience. So unless the in-jokes, you've got a very clicky audience and you've been doing this for 120 episodes and there's an in-joke from episode 10 that you keep running, you can use that. But in-jokes don't necessarily work. So there we go. Just looking through some of the people that have been watching, thank you very much. Thanks, Mark, and thanks, John, for coming on to give me a hand with this. Thank you to everyone who had submitted some questions. We've got time for like 1 or 2 more questions if you like. So if you've got a question, pop them in now. Otherwise, I'll tell you about the products we've just launched, and that'll be less fun than questions. So you can send them in. No jokes about Chris's wooden hut. I suppose it's not really an in-joke if it's yeah, I live in a wooden hut. That's it. Thank you to Matthew, Andrew, Alex, Natalie, Tim, Mike Law, Robert Giro from Philadelphia, Sean Douglas, Simon Raybold, Cynthia Rivera Kelly, Mark, Raphael, Matthew again, John, who's come on, and everyone that's watched, thank you very much. So just to quickly tell you about a couple of things that we've just launched. So there are 2 products we have just launched. One's called Pod Map and one's called Pod Boost. And we're really excited about these because we've been doing a lot of one-to-one calls with a lot of people. And we've been figuring out the best ways to help these people. And it's always very similar. But we decided that these thousands of pounds courses or hundreds of pounds courses, they're just a one-stop shop, and that's not the way. You can't be taught a trade like podcasting or presenting overnight. You can't be taught it in a 6-hour course. You can't be taught it in a 3-day course. You need regular help and regular updates. Even so, it takes 3-5 years to become a car mechanic, right? A doctor trains for 10+ years. I know that when we were in radio and podcasting, we would do it. Well, I did it for 2.5 years for free before they let me in a commercial radio station and gave me a breakfast show. And the thing that all those things have in common is that they're all constantly learning all the time. And so when we were in radio, even presenters with 20+ years experience are given what our manager called a snoop session, which is where the radio manager will pick out some clips from the show and look at what worked, what didn't, what could be improved, not just personally, but so that the show meets its objectives. And so we wanted to help people that are podcasting in the same way, regular stuff, regular help, and not necessarily on the bits that you say, listen to between this minute and tell us what you think. We'll go in and find the bits that we think will improve, or not the bits that you're trying to hide, if you like. So that's our Pod Boost session. You can book in a Pod Boost session. You'll come away with actionable steps to help improve and grow your podcast. If you're just getting started, we started Pod Map as well. If you're new to podcasting, you have an idea but not sure how to turn it into a show. And I know a lot of people have an idea, but they're so set on that idea that they don't think about how that it'll plan out, whether they're going to have enough content, if it's going to be easy to talk about. They don't plan too much. They just dive straight in, which is great. I love it when people dive in. But if you want your show to really rock it, then come and speak to us for a Pod Map session as well. Both of them are $75. If you do message me, I'll do you a little deal though. I don't like to push anything on this, so that's all I'm going to talk about those for. And we've sort of run out of our time. Tim says, how's the acoustics in the hut? Well, you tell me. Not too bad, actually. I am right next to a window, so I do have to hang something up, but they're not too bad. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Thanks, everyone who asked a question. Do keep asking the questions. This video is from the PodTips group, podtips.net, or search for it on Facebook. Everyone helps each other in there. It's really, really great. And I'm overwhelmed every day by, 1, the amount of people asking to join, and 2, the amount of people that just are constantly talking in there and engaging and helping each other out without any sort of personal motives or promotion. And we get 1 or 2, but everyone else pretty much is helping each other out. So thank you very much if you are in the group, and thanks very much for watching. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to go now and have another cup of tea. Have a great weekend. Cheers.